Sorry, I've just had a bit of cramp. Right, so this was written by my wife, Monica, and I shall read it as she wrote it. My son, Jeff. My eldest son, Jeff, had always wanted to become a doctor, and at age 19 was offered a place to study medicine at Liverpool University. But sadly, a year later, just before Christmas 1993, Jeff was knocked off his motorbike by a motorist who pulled out of a side street in front of him. Jeff sustained brain damage as well as multiple fractures. His whole character changed from this kind, loving young man to one of violence, especially towards me. A year later, Jeff was admitted to Liverpool Royal Mental Health Unit and was diagnosed as being bipolar. When he was discharged into my care and that of Dr. Halstead at the Countess of Chester, Jeff was assigned a community psychiatric nurse. The first CPN was excellent, and he always had family team meetings where we could express our concerns for Jeff in his presence. But then Jeff got a new CPN, and things changed. He still visited Jeff, but gave us as a family no help, support, or advice on how to care for Jeff, how to spot signs of any mood change, as these became very mercurial. As one minute Jeff was quiet and withdrawn, and the next minute running round at 100 miles an hour. Sadly, out of the blue in June 2008, Jeff took his own life only 10 days after he had had a consultant's appointment. I had phoned his CPN to express our concerns, but this seems to have fallen on deaf ears. Post-mortem showed that Jeff had not been taking his medication. At the time of Jeff's death, it was very difficult for us all trying to carry on our family business in a place where Jeff had taken his own life. I found it particularly stressful because family and friends, and even Christian friends, seemed to disappear into the ether and would cross the road to avoid talking to me. Thankfully, my loving, caring husband supported me through the darkest of days, as did our monthly meetings at SOBS. My healing, my true healing, came in 2014, 6 years after my son's death, when my husband and I went to India as part of the Farmers International Dialogue, where the theme was looking at the high suicide rate among Indian farmers. I met other farming mothers who had lost their sons to suicide, and by sharing our stories and sharing our tears, my healing began. Don't get me wrong, I will always miss my son. You just have somehow find a new normal. I set up SOBS Chester to help others that have lost ones to suicide, and I've taken the 2-day Papyrus Applied Suicide Prevention Skills Training Assist course and learned how to support those contemplating suicide, a very valuable skill that I am able to draw on and one that I'd highly recommend because any one of us could find ourselves in that situation. Jeff's daughter, Jay. In March 2021, our 19-year-old granddaughter attempted to take their own life by jumping off a bridge in Manchester. What a horrific journey that was, being blue lighted by the police from Delamere to Salford Royal, only to be whisked into a side room, mainly because I was needing to isolate. I was due to have an eye operation on the Monday. Eventually, after waiting 4 hours, our doctor came to see us to let us know that Jay had sustained multiple fractures as well as a bleed on the brain, but fortunately, they had been able to bring under control and didn't think that Jay had sustained lasting brain damage. The doctor asked about Jay's state of mental health. I told him that Jay had had mental health problems for some years, and especially since when 13, when during a row with their mum screamed at them, "What makes you think your dad really loved you when he died?" Because he took his own life. So cold, so callous. I told the doctor that Jay was referred into the Carol Kendrick Centre in Manchester and appeared to receive good mental health support, but since Jay turned 18, there didn't seem to be anyone or anywhere Jay could turn to for help when they reached crisis point. The doctor commented with some sadness that unfortunately He hears this story far too often, and that they are left trying to put these young people back together physically. Jay had fractured her left arm and leg, her pelvis in several places, and had shattered their heels. Physically, they were well looked after, but the mental health care was appalling. We were not allowed to visit Jay in hospital because we were in the middle of a COVID pandemic. And this carried its own frustrations. Jay and I were, however, able to spend most of the time when they were awake, not having physio, on Facebook video calls, including late into the night. It was during these calls that I witnessed the lack of nursing care for Jay when doing their temperature and blood pressure checks. The nurses never engaged Jay in conversation, asking how they were or is there anything they needed. Just silence. What was really alarming was when a nurse giving Jay a bed bath, and the nurse being particularly obnoxious and not really wanting to bed bath him, asked Jay, "So how did you get these injuries then?" Jay replied, "I tried to take my own life by jumping off a bridge." The nurse replied, "Well, you didn't do a very good job, did you?" Listening to Jay's story was very painful to hear. I needed every bit of my self-resilience and to switch from grandmother to listener, and I'm very grateful that I had taken the Paparas Assist course. Jay eventually shared their story with me, and that they had meant to take their own life, and that they had found out that their housemate and best friend had been, in Jay's words, shit-talking them to everyone, going as far as hoping they'd be hit by a car or killed on their bike. This betrayal, along with experienced problems at college, the isolation of the pandemic and healing from a codependent relationship, was just too much. Jay wanted to be with their dad. Jay was in Salford Royal for 2 months, and during that time only saw someone from the mental health team about 5 times, even though the notes state that Jay was seen 3 times a week. Jay was having physio most of these times. When Jay did get to see them, it was a different person each time, so never really built up a rapport with them, and certainly didn't know their story, as was demonstrated when we had a Zoom around Jay's discharge, especially as they kept referring to Jay as Jasmine. Jay was discharged into my care, and their discharge papers were sent snail mail to Cheshire and Merseyside Partnership. It took a month before Jay received a face-to-face assessment, and a month later referred to see a mental health care doctor in Upton Lee. The EMDR therapy that was agreed that Jay needed was not available for 2 years, and as we recognised Jay just wanted to get on with their life back together, we needed to go private, which is what we did. Jay gave me this statement to read. The main problem in hospital was that it seems that I could either have mental health care or physical health care. I had a diagnosis of complex PTSD, and it was recorded that I struggled with flashbacks, insomnia, and nightmares. Had had many episodes of struggling to sleep because I didn't feel safe. And yet, I was thrown into a trauma ward for 3 weeks, surrounded by senile, screaming patients, one of which would regularly open up my curtain at 4 o'clock in the morning and try to wake me up. This was not ideal for someone who, even before being in hospital, had had panic attacks from their partner going into the bathroom in the night, thinking it was my mother coming to kill me. Imagine being locked up in a ward, unable to move, stuck with people screaming at you, and not being able to see any family. I didn't feel safe and constantly felt in fight or flight mode. Their answer to this was not to put me in a side room where I had some chance of feeling safe, or even to make nurses check in with me regularly, but constantly pump me with diazepam. I don't know how I got out of the mind state I was in. I realized that if I carried on being truthful about my mental health and how suicidal I thought it was, I would never get out of there or have control of my life ever again. So I faked it, lied, and said suddenly the intrusive voices had stopped, and suddenly saw why God had saved me, something the nurses kept repeating instead of actually giving me mental health care. The plan was faking it until I could get out and then kill myself properly this time. Somewhere along the way, taking it worked. The intrusive thoughts stopped, and I did want to live again. But all of that isn't in spite of the awful care I received, and not because of it. Post leaving hospital, I have still not had any mental health care 16 months later, and apparently someone so suicidal they jumped off a bridge isn't high enough priority. Not to mention they constantly try to push medication and treatments that have proven to be ineffective against PTSD and actually proven to worsen the symptoms. Most of the time, it feels like me educating them about my condition. And back to Monica. And do you know what makes me sad? That as a mum who lost her son to suicide in 2008 and nearly lost a grandchild to suicide in 2021, nothing has changed in our mental health care services. In fact, I will go so far as to say that in my lived experience, the lack of mental health care and support is worse. And I'm sorry, but you can write as many no more suicide strategy reports as you like, but until the support reaches those in crisis at the point where they need it most, these reports are not worth the paper they are written on. Thank you.